Hello, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper reading. Today we are going to discuss the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 8th January 2019. The news to be discussed has been presented on the screen and timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let's start our today's discussion. The first news appears on page number 1 and also as a continuation on page number 11. Now, this news is with respect to the centre's plan for providing 10% quota for the poor. It says that the Union Cabinet approves Constitution Amendment Bill for reservation in the general category. However, this news mentions that 10% quota bill may fail legal test as economic backwardness cannot be the sole criteria as established by the 9-judge constitution bench in the case of Indira Sawhney. So in this news, the Union Cabinet has approved a constitution amendment bill to provide 10% reservation to the economically backward sections of the general category. So in this news analysis, let us understand about the decision of the Union Cabinet as well as an important ruling as decided in the case of Indira Sawhney. Now from your examination point of view, this topic gets covered under GS paper 2 under Indian Constitution, welfare schemes for the vulnerable sections of the population including laws, as well as issues relating to education as well as human resource. So we have already mentioned that this bill provides for 10% reservation to the economically backward section of the general category. Further, this bill will also cover people from different minority communities including Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, as well as other minority communities who fulfill one of these criteria. So the criteria as mentioned are that they should have a household income of less than rupees 8 lakh per annum. Second, they must have agricultural land of less than 5 acres. Third, they must have a house smaller than 1000 square feet. Fourth, they must have a residential plot smaller than 100 yards in a municipality. Fifth, a residential plot of less than 200 yards in a non-notified municipality. So these are some of the criteria for which a person can claim 10% reservation who belongs to the general category. Another important point with respect to this reservation is that this particular reservation of 10% shall be over and above the 50% reservation limit available to the members of scheduled caste, scheduled tribe and other backward classes. And this limit was set up by a 9-judge constitution bench in the case of Indira Sawhney. So it is in this aspect that certain judicial experts say that this particular bill might face certain judicial challenges in a court of law. So the government is likely to introduce a constitution amendment bill today in the parliament with an objective to amend Article 15 as well as Article 16 of the Indian Constitution. So this constitution amendment bill, when introduced in the parliament, has to be passed by a majority of total membership of the house and also by a majority of not less than 2/3 of the members of the house present and voting, and it must be ratified by not less than 50% of the states by simple majority. So this is the criteria to pass this particular constitution amendment bill if it is introduced in the parliament, as it aims to amend Article 15 as well as Article 16 of the Indian Constitution. So as already discussed, this decision of the government to introduce 10% reservation quota above the 50% reservation quota may pose certain judicial challenge. Now this says that in its famous Indira Sawhney judgment, the Supreme Court had set a cap of 50% on the quotas. Hence, a constitution amendment bill would be required as the constitution does not provide for reservation on the basis of economic criteria. So this 9-judge constitution bench in the case of Indira Sawhney held that a backward class cannot be determined only and exclusively with reference to economic criteria. The court further held that such economic criteria may be a consideration or basis along with and in addition to a social backwardness. Thus, effectively the court held that to determine a backward class, only economic criteria cannot be considered alone and it must be added along with another criteria of social backwardness. Further, this news on page number 11 mentions that this particular bill, which provides for 10% reservation, may be tested against this doctrine of basic structure on grounds of equality as established in the case of Kesav Nanda Bharti case. So these are some of the judicial challenges which may be posed to this particular constitution amendment bill. Now this case of Indra Swani is with respect to this Mandal Commission report of 1980. The then government in power introduced the 27% reservation in civil post and services under the Government of India for socially and economically backward classes. Further, this notification of the government to provide 27% reservation was followed by another notification by which within the 27% of vacancies, preference was to be given to candidates belonging to poorer sections of the socially and economically backward classes, and 10% vacancies were to be reserved for other economically backward sections who were not covered by any of the existing schemes of reservation in that time. So basically, apart from the 27% reservation, it also provided for 10% reservation to be reserved for other economically backward sections of the society who were not covered by any of the existing schemes during that time. So in this case, the majority judgment upheld a reservation of 27%. So basically, they agreed that this reservation of 27% is constitutionally valid in favor of backward classes. However, the Supreme Court struck down the reservation of 10% in favor of other economically backward categories. So it is this decision of this 9-judge constitution bench which the bill has to overcome if it faces judicial challenge in a court of law. Now another important point with respect to this judgment is that the court contrasted Article 16.4 and Article 15.4 and stated that Article 16.4 refers to any backward classes of citizens, where it refers primarily to social backwardness, and Article 15.4 refers to any socially and educationally backward classes of citizens or for the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. So this difference between Article 16.4 and 15.4 will become important in times to come. So in this analysis, we have tried to understand this 10% reservation and also certain judicial challenges which the government may face, specifically with respect to the decision of Indra Swani judgment, where it struck down the reservation of 10% in favor of other economically backward categories. Now this news becomes extremely important as it may have a social and economic impact in the rest of our society. The bill will be present today in the Lok Sabha. So let's wait for tomorrow for the exact constituents or exact contents of the bill. With this, let's move on to our next news analysis. The next news appears on page number 11. It says, Supreme Court notice to Election Commission on VVPAT verification. Now as per this news, a petition has been filed in the Supreme Court for cross-verification of EVMs and VVPATs in at least 30% of randomly chosen polling station in each assembly and Lok Sabha constituency. Now this topic becomes extremely important with respect to VVPAT. As you can see, this particular question was asked in the year 2018. It said, in the light of recent controversy regarding the use of electronic voting machines, what are the challenges before the Election Commission of India to ensure the trustworthiness of elections in India? So in the backdrop of this particular question asked in the year 2018 in GS paper 2, this topic becomes extremely crucial where a petition has been filed with respect to cross-verification of at least 30% of EVMs and VVPATs at polling stations in Assembly as well as Lok Sabha constituencies. From your mains perspective, this topic as mentioned forms a part of GS paper 2. So in this analysis, let us go through the various reasons as provided by the petitioners with respect to this 30% randomly chosen polling station. The petitioners have said that the Election Commission had chosen to conduct cross-verification in an inexplicably minuscule manner, which basically means that the Election Commission has chosen to do this cross-verification in a small sample number of EVMs and VVPATs. So according to the petitioners, this random selection of very small number of EVMs and VVPATs by the Election Commission is manifestly arbitrary, irrational, unreasonable, and is also in violation of Article 14 of the Indian Constitution, as there is no specific criteria for selection of these EVMs and VVPATs for cross-verification. So the petitioners have said that to prevent bias and mischief, at least 30% of all polling stations in a constituency must be chosen for cross-verification. And as per the petitioners, this will also improve voter confidence as well as transparency in the entire electoral process. So after hearing the plea by the petitioners, a bench led by Chief Justice of India Justice Ranjan Gogoi has ordered the Election Commission to respond to this particular petition. So in this aspect, let's wait for the response of the Election Commission with respect to random selection of these VVPATs and EVMs for cross verifications at different polling stations of constituencies. So far we were discussing about cross verification with respect to EVMs and VVPAT. Now VVPAT refers to voter verified paper audit trail, and VVPAT is a method of providing feedback to the voters, and this feedback is provided through a ballotless voting system. So basically VVPAT is intended as an independent verification system for electronic voting machines or EVMs. So in a VVPAT, a printer-like apparatus is attached to the EVM, that is electronic voting machine. So when a vote is casted, a receipt is generated which shows the serial number, name as well as symbol of the candidate. Hence, this confirms the vote and the voter can verify the details. Further, the receipt once viewed goes inside a container linked to the EVM and can then only be assessed by the election officers. So this is basically how a VVPAT functions, and it also provides for more transparency with respect to voting process. Because when a vote is cast, it generates a receipt which shows the serial number, the name as well as symbol of the candidate which the person has voted for. Thus, VVPAT helps in providing feedback to the voters using a ballotless voting system. Now, after these discussions, these forms your practice question. Now, these questions were asked in the prelims of 2017. So, what you can do is to take a pause of 5 seconds. First, it says, consider the following statements. The Election Commission of India is a 5-member body. No, this statement is incorrect, as Election Commission of India is a 3-member body. Second, Union Ministry of Home Affairs decides the election schedule for the conduct of both general elections and by-elections. No, this is also incorrect, as it is decided by Election Commission of India. Third, Election Commission resolves the disputes relating to splits or mergers of recognized political parties. Yes, this statement is correct. The question was, which of the statements given above is correct? So here the correct answer is D. Moving on to this particular question, it says, consider the following statements. In the election for Lok Sabha or State Assembly, the winning candidate must get at least 50% of the votes polled to be declared elected. No, this is incorrect. The person concerned must get the maximum votes as compared to his rival candidates. Second, according to the provisions laid down in the Constitution of India, in Lok Sabha, the Speaker's post goes to the majority party and the deputy speakers to the opposition. No, this statement is also incorrect. Hence, in this, D is the correct answer. This one says, for election to Lok Sabha, a nomination paper can be filed by anyone residing in India? No. A resident of the constituency from which election is to be contested? No. Any citizen of India whose name appears in the electoral roll of a constituency? Yes, this statement is correct. So we see any issue related to election and the entire electoral process becomes extremely important for us to understand, not only from prelims but also from mains perspective. As we have seen, a question has been asked on the controversy with respect to EVM and VVPAT. Thus, this topic becomes very important. With this, let's move on to our next news analysis. Now, the next news appears on page number 18. It says, gas hydrates produced under space conditions, and this was done by a team of IIT Madras. So basically in this particular news, the team of IIT Madras tried to produce hydrates of carbon dioxide as well as methane, and these were produced in a space conditions, meaning in extremely low temperature and pressure. Now, to understand the significance of this development, let us understand first about these hydrates. Now, this gas hydrate is a solid ice-like form of water which contains gas molecules in its molecular cavities. In nature, this gas is mostly methane, as methane gas hydrate is stable at sea floor at water depths. Now, this gas hydrate is stable till the point where temperature exceeds and where stability of this gas hydrate decreases. So up to a certain depth, these gas hydrates are stable in the sea floor. So because of the stability of these gas hydrates up to certain depth, scientists are trying to find ways to sequester carbon dioxide or store carbon dioxide as a hydrate. So it is in this aspect that this particular news gains significance. From your prelims perspective, this topic forms a part of general science as well as general issues on environment, ecology, as well as climate change. So it is in this aspect that this research becomes extremely important as scientists at IIT Madras have tried to produce in lab conditions hydrates of carbon dioxide as well as methane. And this has been done at extremely low temperature as well as pressure. Another important aspect to be noted is that hydrate of carbon dioxide is thermodynamically more stable than the hydrate of methane. Hence, if methane hydrate has remained stable for so many years under seabed, hence it may be possible to store carbon dioxide as hydrate under seabed. So it is in this aspect that scientists are trying to find out various ways to store carbon dioxide as hydrates under the seabed. So it is in this aspect that IIT Madras, in collaboration with GAIL Authority of India Limited, is working to recover methane from methane hydrate from the Krishna Godavari basin. And simultaneously, they are also trying to find out ways to sequester carbon dioxide. So after going through this analysis, the real question is that why are these gas hydrates important? As you can see, large quantities of gas hydrates exist on the world's continental margins, and methane from these gas hydrates may constitute a future source of natural gas. It is because of this that scientists around the world are trying to figure out ways to sequester or isolate these gases from their hydrates. And it is because of these various international programs for sequestration of these gases from their hydrates are taking place in different countries, including Japan, US, and other places. Further, these gas hydrates are also important for sea floor stability studies because melting gas hydrates may cause sea floor or landslides. So, in this aspect, it becomes extremely important to know about gas hydrates and also to study about methane gas released from its hydrate as it plays a significant role in climate change. So, with respect to all these aspects, these gas hydrates becomes extremely important for us to understand from our prelims perspective. Thus, with this, let's move on to our next news analysis. The next news appears on page number 13. It says, no decision yet on quantum of interim dividend to central government. RBI wary of excess liquidity and will release funds only if absolutely needed, says Shakti Kanta Das, the RBI governor, and also stresses on central bank's independence. This article highlights that RBI has yet not taken a decision regarding the quantum of interim dividend to be transferred to the central government. Now, this issue of transferring dividends to the center has been a source of considerable tension between the central government as well as the Reserve Bank of India. And in this aspect, the Reserve Bank of India has recently set up a committee under the chairmanship of former RBI Governor Bimal Jalan. The Bimal Jalan committee will examine how much reserve the Reserve Bank has to maintain and how much the reserve is to be transferred to the central government. So in this aspect, let us understand as to why does the RBI have to pay dividend to the central government? What are the sources of income for the RBI and trends in dividend payment? Now this particular news in your prelims forms a part of Indian economy. So the question is that why does RBI pay dividend to the government? Now Reserve Bank of India has been constituted under the Reserve Bank of India Act 1934. And as per this Reserve Bank of India Act 1934, so section 47 of the RBI says that any profits made by the Reserve Bank from its operations has to be sent to the central government. So the issue is that how does RBI earn profits? Now the following can be considered to be the main sources of income for the Reserve Bank. First, returns on foreign currency assets such as bonds, treasury bills of other central banks. Interest on its holdings of domestically issued government bonds or securities. Interest on loans given to banks. Management commissions on handling the borrowings of state governments as well as the central government. Thus, net profit is calculated by subtracting the operational expenditures and other expenses as stipulated in section 47 of the RBI Act. So these can be said to be some of the ways in which RBI earns profit. Basically, on returns on foreign currency assets, either on bonds or treasury bills of other central banks, interest earned on domestically issued government bonds or securities, interest on loan given to banks, management commissions by handling the borrowings of central government as well as state governments. So, effectively, the net profit is calculated by subtracting the operation expenses and other expenses as per Section 47 of the Reserve Bank of India Act 1934. Earlier, the Reserve Bank used to transfer the dividend after keeping aside certain part of its profits for maintenance of reserves. However, the Maligam Committee recommended that since the RBI had built sufficient amount of reserves, there was no need to make any more transfer of profit to the reserves. So basically, the RBI kept certain part of the dividend for maintenance of reserves and the rest was transferred to the central government. However, the Maligam Committee recommended that since RBI had built in enough or sufficient amount of reserves, so there was no need to make any more transfer of profits to the reserves. And the committee recommended that the entire profit should be transferred to the central government. So in 2013-14, RBI decided to transfer the entire surplus in RBI's profit and loss account to the central government without appropriation to its reserves. So since 2013-14, the RBI has been transferring its entire surplus to the center. And the year 2017-18, the surplus transferred by RBI to the central government was a tune of rupees 50,000 crores. So these are the recent trends of dividend payment from RBI to the central government. Thus this news on interim dividend becomes very important. Since this news is in transition, so let's wait for the final decision of the Reserve Bank of India. With this, let's move on to our next news analysis. The next news appears on page number 10. The news says, Leprosy is no longer a ground for divorce. Lok Sabha passes an amendment bill. So basically, the Lok Sabha has passed the Personal Laws Amendment Bill 2018, which aims to remove leprosy as a ground of divorce from various laws governing marriages in India. It mentions that the aim of the Act is to amend the Divorce Act 1869, Dissolution of Marriages Act 1939, Special Marriage Act 1954, the Hindu Marriage Act 1955, and the Hindu Adoptions and Maintenance Act 1956. An amendment with respect to these acts is to remove leprosy as a ground of divorce from different laws governing marriages in India. Now, this topic becomes very important, and in your prelims examination, it forms a part of rights issue, whereas in your mains, it gets covered under GS paper 2 under welfare schemes for vulnerable sections of the population and laws made for them. So, what are the reasons for this Personal Laws Amendment Bill to be introduced in the Parliament? So, as per the bill, owing to advancements in medical science, the disease of leprosy is now completely curable and can also be treated with various multi-drug therapy. However, the old law still continued to discriminate against people affected by leprosy, and leprosy became a ground of divorce. Now, another reason is that the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution in 2010 on elimination of discrimination against persons affected by leprosy and their family members, and this resolution was also signed and ratified by India. Hence, in this aspect, it becomes imperative for India to enact a law which do not discriminate on grounds of leprosy. Further, even the Law Commission in its report recommended the elimination of discrimination against people affected by leprosy. And more recently, even the Supreme Court of India has issued number of directions to the central and state governments and has asked the governments to spread awareness about leprosy and also to facilitate a life of equality and dignity for those affected by leprosy. Further, the court has also directed the central and state governments to take steps for rehabilitation and integration of people affected with leprosy in the mainstream society. So these can be said to be some of the reasons for which this particular bill has been introduced in the parliament. So if this bill is passed by both Lok Sabha and Raj Sabha, then the bill will go a long way in detaching the social stigma associated with the disease of leprosy, as discriminating on grounds of leprosy in the present form amounts to violation of Article 14, 19 as well as 21. Hence, in this aspect, this particular news with respect to Personal Laws Amendment Bill 2018, which aims to remove leprosy as a ground of divorce, becomes extremely important, not only from rights perspective, but also from issue of social justice. With this, let's move on to our next news discussion. The next news appears on page number 5. It says, Animal begins to arrive at Waynad Sanctuary. Availability of water and fodder, the attraction for wildlife from Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. In this news analysis, you must know about the geographical map of Waynad as well as its special features. Now it mentions that Waynad Wildlife Sanctuary is contiguous to the protected areas of Nagarhole and Bandipur of Karnataka on the northeast. Suppose if this is Waynad Wildlife Sanctuary, then Nagarhole and Bandipur of Karnataka falls on the northeast of Waynad. So basically somewhere around here. And Madhumulai of Tamil Nadu falls on the southeast. It says that Waynad is rich in biodiversity and the sanctuary is an integral part of the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. Further, the forest types include South Asian moist deciduous forest, West Coast semi-evergreen forest, as well as plantations of teak, eucalyptus and grevillea. Moving further, as mentioned that it is a part of Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, it is safe haven for white-rumped vulture, Himalayan griffon and Egyptian vulture, and also red-headed vultures which are critically endangered as per the IUCN Red List. So this becomes extremely important from your prelims perspective. Now again another important fact is that recently it was in news because of 3 new invasive alien species which have been found in the region. These 3 invasive alien species are floral species, namely lemon basil, blue snake weed, and red flower ragleaf. Now, these invasive alien species are not native to their place or not endemic, and their introduction or spread outside their natural past or present distribution threatens biological diversity. Hence, the 3 recent alien species found in the region of Waynad are lemon basil, blue snake weed, and red flower ragleaf. Now, these 3 invasive species becomes important from your prelims perspective. Now, another important aspect with respect to Waynad is that Kattu Naikan tribes live on the fringes of this Waynad's wildlife sanctuary, who were in news as they faced fierce competition from forest authority in collecting gooseberries from their reserves. Further, another important aspect is that Waynad has not been declared as a tiger reserve, and its vegetation ranges from semi-evergreen to moist deciduous and also to dry deciduous. And also the fact that Waynad is a part of UNESCO recognized Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. So these are some of the important aspects with respect to Waynad Sanctuary. Now after our discussion, this forms your 4th practice question for the day. What you can do is to take a pause of 5 seconds. It says, which of the following statements about Waynad Wildlife Sanctuary are correct? First, Kattu Naikan tribes lives on the fringes of Waynad Wildlife Sanctuary. Yes, this is correct as we have just seen. Second, it has been declared as a tiger reserve. No, this is incorrect. It has not been declared as a tiger reserve. Third, its vegetation ranges from semi-evergreen to moist deciduous to dry deciduous. Yes, this is also correct. Fourth, it is a part of UNESCO recognized Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. Yes, this is also correct as we have just seen. So in this 1, 3 and 4 are the correct options. Hence C becomes our correct answer. So we understand that this particular news on Waynad Sanctuary becomes important from our prelims perspective. And especially these 3 alien species becomes equally important. With this, let's move on to our next news discussion. The last article of today's discussion appears on page number 9. It says, Jaitapur, a risky and expensive project. Unless the government is transparent about details, it will be engulfed in yet another controversy. Now this news highlights concerns raised on civil nuclear deal between India and France. This topic forms a part of GS paper 2 under bilateral relations. So India had signed a civil nuclear deal with France in 2008 which involved building a nuclear power plant in Jaitapur in Maharashtra. And as a part of the agreement, 6 European pressurized reactors would be constructed with a total capacity of 9,600 megawatts, making it the world's largest nuclear power plant. So in this article, it has highlighted that the project is quite risky as well as expensive, and it has also raised certain security and safety concerns with respect to additional burden on the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited. Hence, in this aspect, let us first understand about India's nuclear liability law as well as International Convention on Supplementary Compensation for Nuclear Damage, and then we'll also see some of the concerns as highlighted in this particular article with respect to civil nuclear deal between India and France. Now, as per the civil nuclear liability law, in case of a nuclear damage, the liability is that of the operator, which in India's case would be NPCIL, that is Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited. And in cases of such damage, NPCIL has to pay a maximum of rupees 500 crores, and the rest has to be paid by government. So there is also government's liability with respect to nuclear damage, where government's liability is up to 300 million SDR. Thus, all operators need to take insurance or provide financial security to cover their liability. Further, the operator can claim compensation from the supplier. But there is a caveat here, because Section 17 of the Nuclear Liability Law provides that the operator can only claim compensation from the supplier only if such conditions has been prescribed in the civil nuclear liability contract. So basically, such right to recourse from the supplier must be a part of the civil nuclear contract. And in the absence of anything mentioned in the contract, the operator will not be able to claim any compensation from the supplier. So it is in this aspect that this article has highlighted that there is no clarity with respect to the nuclear agreement between India and France with respect to the fact that whether this provision has been explicitly provided in the contract itself. So in that case, in case of any damage, the entire liability will be dot on the operator, that is Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited. Moving further, this article also highlights about International Convention on Supplementary Compensation for Nuclear Damage. So basically, this is a convention which allows for increasing the compensation amount in the event of a nuclear incident through public funds pooled in by contracting parties based on their own installed nuclear capacities. So basically, under this convention, all the parties who have ratified this convention, they contribute funds for their installed nuclear capacities. Similarly, other parties also contribute for their installed nuclear capacities. Hence, under this convention, there is a pool of sum which gets accumulated. So in case of nuclear accident, these parties can claim certain amount of compensation from this particular fund maintained through this CSC convention. So it says that a state which is party to either the 1963 Vienna Convention on Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage or the Paris Convention on Third Party Liability in the field of nuclear energy could also become a party to this CSC, that is Convention on Supplementary Compensation. Further, a state which is not a party to either of these two conventions could also become a party to the CSC if its national law on nuclear liability is in compliance with the provision of CSC. Since India was not a party to the Vienna or Paris conventions, hence it signed and ratified the CSC. That is, India has signed as well as ratified this convention on supplementary compensation. So the concerns raised in this article is primarily with respect to delays and rising cost of construction of nuclear plant. So this article has raised the concern that whether India should be really spending so much money on construction of nuclear power plants, particularly when low carbon alternatives such as solar energy have become much cheaper. Another concern as raised in this article is with respect to safety, as safety issues have been emerged with respect to design and construction of the nuclear plants. As the article highlights that recently the French nuclear safety regulator has raised concerns related to substandard quality of raw materials such as pressure pipes used in EPR reactors. Another concern raised by this article is with respect to liability of NPCIL in case of a nuclear damage. As we have seen that in case of a nuclear damage, then the entire liability is that of the operator, which in this case is NPCIL. The operator can only claim compensation from the supplier if such a provision has been provided in the contract. The article highlights that there is not much clarity whether this provision has been a part of the contract itself, because in such a case the operator will not be able to claim compensation from the supplier. Hence, there is need for more clarity on this aspect. Thus, the article mentions that the government needs to be more transparent on all the concerns raised by this article, mainly on delays, rising cost, as well as safety norms on design and construction, as well as the liability of NPCIL in case of any nuclear damage. And the article also mentions that the government needs to disclose the nature of arrangement reached between France with respect to this nuclear liability. Thus, in this aspect, this article becomes extremely important to understand with respect to this nuclear liability of the operator and safety concerns and rising cost of a nuclear power plant, especially when low carbon alternatives such as solar energy have become much cheaper. Hence, in this aspect, this news becomes extremely relevant. With this, we come to an end to discussion of today's newspaper. Let's move on to the question for the day.